Testing. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, great. Just wait one more minute to get started.
Okay.
All right, why don't we get started? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BlockSpaces live show. My name is Shahan Khoshafian. I'll be the host for today. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can check back in. We have a live show that we do every Thursday on a different topic. Last week, we had an awesome show that we did with Rosa on the sustainable food supply chain. And today's topic is going to be blockchain battling COVID-19 using Rapid Supplier Connect. But before we get started, let's get to know the guests. Rosa, it would be great to get to know your background, yourself, and then if you could talk a little bit about how you and Shawnna met, some of the work you've done together. I know Shawnna has an extremely impressive background. I'm really excited to learn from her and dive deeper into the topic. So Rosa, take it away.
Yeah, so I'm Rosa Shores. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BlockSpaces. We're a blockchain product development company in Tampa, Florida. We focus on enterprise applications of blockchain, but we really are agnostic. We love all the blockchain things, and so we are very focused on developing products that are viable and relevant for today. I'm also the vice president of the Florida Blockchain Business Association. We focus on regulation and government applications of blockchain, and also just started working with the Florida Department of Agriculture on some potential blockchain use cases. Very much escalated due to COVID-19, but these are things that have kind of been at the forefront for a while now, but it's just, there's a lot of focus now with COVID-19. And Shawnna and I met, we actually met at a Citibank, that was at the Citibank Women in Technology Forum, and Shawnna was there representing IBM, doing sort of like a blockchain fundamentals. We broke up in small groups, and she was doing this, she was leading this blockchain fundamentals thing. And I think it kind of ended up being the Shawnna and Rosa show at that table. we kind of just forged a friendship really fast, and with this kind of focus on women, not just in emerging technology, but women in blockchain, which is even more unusual, and then kind of our motherhood, and we just kind of forged a really fast friendship. So it's been amazing.
Yes,
awesome.
I would agree.
And Shawnna, could you just give us a bit about your background? I know is there's a lot of things that you've been involved with. I went through your background with Rosa, and I was just blown away by all the stuff you've done. But I would love to learn about, your involvement in the space and what you did that kind of led up to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a long story. Of course, I was cryptocurrency mining back in 2011. I think it took me maybe a year to mine a third of a Bitcoin. So that was my first forte into really understanding blockchain, but it wasn't until I would say back a couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to be invited by the Prime Minister of Russia to speak on stage with him at one of the big events in St. Petersburg. And he, of course, spoke very eloquently on, the future of law and the future of technology. I spoke on artificial intelligence. We, of course, have Watson at IBM, and, Watson has done a lot in artificial intelligence to really make some big differences in the world. But I'm kind of sitting there, I do my speech, and the next gentleman gets up, and he's a professor from the University of London, and he starts talking about blockchain, but in a very different way than I'd ever seen it spoken about before. He starts talking about blockchain for business. And I did not realize until that point that there was a really great convergence that could happen with all the technologies we have at IBM with blockchain together. So I quickly got on that bandwagon. I started speaking on the convergence of artificial intelligence and blockchain, and people initially thought I was crazy. Even at IBM, they're like, those two have nothing to do with each other. And when I was able to describe, we need a place that is trustworthy for the data to sit, because I was having problems in artificial intelligence training our bots to be able to do the simplest of some of the legal tasks that we were doing, but it was because of the data we were feeding it. So until I had a data scientist go in and review the data and make sure that it was clean data, I was not able to train my AI bots. So the idea behind that a couple of years ago was to then have blockchain be the trusted source place that we would be able to keep that ledger of the data and make sure the data is clean data and trustworthy. So that's really how I got involved in this space, dove straight in, started working in our healthcare side of IBM fortuitously somehow at the beginning of this year. I did not know that this was going to become so big. Our team is called Watson Health for blockchain, or IBM Watson Health for blockchain. And we just dive into creating solutions that are AI and blockchain enabled, which we believe both technologies make a huge difference for various medical issues.
Awesome. And I'm really excited to learn more about that. Your experience about, within IBM of you're doing blockchain and AI and all these different things, and people thinking like, what is she doing? Or is she crazy doing all these different things? Like I felt the same way when I entered the space, because I come from an enterprise background as well. And I think now that this crisis has hit, people are seeing a lot of the impact this technology is going to have in our future. So let's transition a bit to, Shawnna had mentioned blockchain for business. Let's transition a bit to the supply chain. Rosa, question for you. Last week we talked about the food supply chain, and I know recently you did a presentation for the Bay Area Manufacturers Association. Beyond food supply chain, what are we seeing? Like, what are people using blockchain in the supply chain for?
Yeah. And so part of what we're seeing, it's really interesting that you made the call out of, and Shawnna too, that there's like sort of all of these different applications. And if you're interested in blockchain, and especially some of these business applications for blockchain, it does start to seem like, we've had plenty of people say, oh, you're working on this, and now you're working on this, and now you're working on this. But blockchain is a foundational technology that kind of combines all of these different technologies and brings them together. And so when we talk about different use cases, what we really want to make people understand is we're talking about the same technology. And so these use cases just start being applicable to all of these different situations. Some of the things Shawnna and I were talking about right before the podcast started, that some of the things that we're seeing now, we feel that this virus has sort of escalated the adoption of blockchain by at least 5 years, if not more. And some of these problems that we're seeing in almost every spectrum across the supply chain, and you got to think that like everything has a supply chain. It's not just supply chain for manufacturing or supply chain for retail. Everything that you see has some sort of process and supply chain behind it. It requires sort of this ledger of transactions, and that the ability to have that ledger of transactions be transparent and immutable, it doesn't make sense perhaps in a world that we came from, but makes complete sense in the world that we have now, because all of these things we're seeing emerge, like I mentioned last week, whether it's food supply chain or track and trace for your shipments, these digital ID credentials, this sort of credentialing on blockchain, track and trace for these testings for these medical supplies, which we're going to talk about soon. It almost in every way, even down to how they're dispersing the funds from the SBA to the average citizen. These are all potential use cases for blockchain that would make those processes much more transparent and efficient.
And Shawnna, IBM just announced the Rapid Supplier Connect. So how are you guys addressing this problem specifically at IBM?
Absolutely. Do you mind if I share?
Yeah,
my screen?
for sure.
All right. I think it might be. I love using visuals. I am a very visual person myself. So here's a presentation that I did for a university earlier this week. I do a lot of work with our academics. I am a very big proponent of continuing as often as you can in school.
Mm.
And this was with the University of Colorado. And then I also spoke to Columbia earlier this week, but talking about the convergence of a pandemic with the fourth industrial revolution. I think if we back up just 1 second and look at the 30,000 foot view, it's really important for us to understand where we are today. Of course, we have had now 4 industrial revolutions. We're in the midst of the 4th one right now. That's artificial intelligence, 3D printing. It really is, and blockchain, of course, it's really that intelligence revolution. We're seeing a new form of intelligence being created and providing us with, insights that we never could have imagined before. The 5th industrial revolution, we think, is going to probably be right at the end of the 2020s here. I think that's going to converge, honestly, with the 4th industrial revolution when we start to see some of the biotechnologies. But again, our base of blockchain is going to be important. So let me share with you then what we've built here. And this is a very good example of why those intelligence types of programs like blockchain, like AI, like quantum computing, as we're coming out with, are really important for society today. Now, one of the main issues that we had heard of initially, so how this happened, let me go back to, sorry about that, I'm trying to actually see the screen. So it was right at the beginning of the first lockdown. I had one of our executives at IBM. My title right now is the Global Offering Leader for Watson Health Blockchain. So that kind of tags me with the, hey, what are you going to do about this issue? So I sat down with our medical professionals at IBM, sat down with a great team, including Mark Treshock, who is one of our most wonderful leaders. Really enjoy working with him. Unfortunately, he's not here because he's actually we had to divide and conquer. I'm here and he's dealing with a few of the items that we needed to deal with on the internal side. But one of the main issues that came up was the supply chain. We knew there was going to be a shortage because it was just starting to even be in the news. There's not enough masks, there's not enough gloves, there's not enough et cetera, et cetera. I was on a call yesterday, and which brought me to tears thinking about it. We ran out of body bags here in the United States. That should never, ever be the case, but that is reality today.
Right.
So with this issue, we have our provider organizations like your hospitals. They typically go to the established suppliers. Now, the established suppliers, they have long-term relationships with, but they don't have enough supplies. They're literally, the shortage is there. So then we start to see other short-term suppliers coming in saying, I've had to shut down my manufacturing. I've had to shut down, any of my sales. I have a lot of people, thousands of people who are out of work right now, who are willing to come back and volunteer in my factory, and we can then recreate the factory to do many different things. We're calling those our new critical goods suppliers. And so those are the ones that they have no idea. They've never been in the provider organization ecosystem. They don't know how to sell into them. A good example is General Motors and Ford. Both companies are creating various different things. Ford, I know, is creating, I think it was masks and gloves, which was, something very different than Ford typically would have created. And then we have General Motors, who are working with Ventac to create ventilators. So it's really neat to see, really everyone stepping up to the plate. Definitely reminds me of Rosie the Riveter, kind of those old time days when everybody just digs in and helps each other. And so with those critical goods suppliers, what we're doing is helping connect them in through a couple of the IBM networks. We have 2 blockchain networks we've now combined into one big solution called Rapid. And Rapid Supplier Connect combines Trust Your Supplier, which is very well known in the industry. Trust Your Supplier is that digital identity piece that can make sure that the suppliers and the buyers have trust between them, of course, all based on blockchain. We also have inventory visibility, and that's through our Sterling supply chain insights. This is one of our main solutions we even use internally in IBM to see what our inventory visibility is. We are managing over $40 billion right now through various IBM products that are for procurement, and this being one of them. So it's pretty fascinating to be able to take some very well-known products and trusted products within IBM and bring those out to market. And so what we ended up doing is created Rapid Supplier Connect. We are offering that for free through August 31st to the market. And any suppliers and any buyers can connect together to, to do those transactions. What's interesting, so this is kind of fun. I've been on calls since way too early this morning, before 7 in the morning. And my second call of the morning was with a supplier who has, I don't even know if I want to say the number, so we're just going to go low on it. But at this moment, I can bring in another 6 million N95 masks to the United States.
Wow.
Yep. And it is amazing. Mark and I are seeing, as we're starting to gather it together, we've got about 100 million N95 masks that we can get our hands on and get to the buyers here in the United States, like the hospitals. And so since we're seeing all these shortages, the most amazing thing, I think, and I feel fortunate to be able to have the IBM name supporting this, because we're seeing suppliers going, oh, wait, I trust IBM. I trust the name. Yes, we're going to reach out to you. And so what Mark and I have been seeing is kind of this inundated, we're going, you have 6 million masks. You've got, 600,000 was one of them, which is kind of funny to think about that. And then of course the 100 million coming in, and these are all valid, resources for us to bring into the United States. About 6.6 million are here currently in the US right now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's awesome, but they just didn't know how to connect to the buyers. So simply that's what we're doing.
That is great. And I love the stories you mentioned about like Ford and General Motors, like doing different things now in manufacturing. I love that story. I even saw like this shoe brand called Atom. They're like Allbirds in the shoes, and they were making masks as well and using their manufacturing to help for these kind of situations. So I really love when companies do that. And I love the solution set you talked about. It's very much needed now to track all of these critical medical supplies. And to your point, matching the different buyers to the suppliers. And so Rosa, anything to add on that point? Anything else that you think specifically blockchain can solve problems for, whether that's in healthcare, whether that's dealing with the crisis, anything you can add to what Shawnna just mentioned?
Yeah, and so that is, what we're seeing here happen is this sort of cooperation that is absolutely necessary for a blockchain network to function. I mean, a blockchain is a network of participants that are cooperating. So this sort of society that we're kind of seeing that has been brought to the forefront because of this crisis is really this kind of world where cooperation is more important than anything else. And so having a technology that can facilitate that kind of cooperation across channels, across disparate systems, across suppliers, there is actually technology now that can facilitate that kind of environment. And so the potential to solve problems just becomes, it grows on such a large scale. So that is, and I feel like that's one of the things that, as we shift toward this kind of new world, and I do feel like we're going to be in a new world even after all of this is said and done, because there's certain things that you just don't unlearn. There's certain things that you just don't unfeel. And, some of the hits that these companies have taken because of these problems, you just don't go back to business as usual. You have to go back to a way that mitigates against this ever happening again.
That's a great point. And just to wrap things up, one of the things it was briefly touched upon, but I have 2 powerhouse women in blockchain here. And so I wanted to ask you both, what can we do to help with getting more women in blockchain and in emerging tech? Any advice you could give, any ways that you got involved that you can share with others so that they can potentially come in, or, if you would welcome others to reach out to you to to know more about the space, I'd love to hear more about that. So Shawnna, I guess we could start with you. And then Rosa, you could wrap it up, and then we can wrap up the show.
Sure. Yep.
So this is near and dear to my heart. One of the organizations, so prior to blockchain, I actually had an organization called Women in E-Discovery, still intact today, over 5,000 legal professionals who get together weekly in over 30 chapters to educate each other and really start to share the wealth of knowledge. And I started that back in 2000, I think it was 9, maybe 2007. It's been a while, because there weren't a lot of women in that industry. And so it was fun for me to be able to bring other women into the industry, but I realized that they needed education. And often it was a single mom, they're choosing between, buying milk and going to school. Well, milk's going to win. And so we put together a program that was free education and provided that education then once a month through our chapters. And I saw an increase in a lot of women coming into the space. So kind of fast forward to 2017, I'm on stage at MIT with 4 other rock star female attorneys, and we were asked various questions. And when we were done, because it was all female panel, Daza Greenwood from MIT stood up and he said, "Okay, so I'm going to challenge you to start a diversity group." So that formed Diversity in Blockchain, which is a nonprofit I started with Susan Joseph, Josh Clayman, Michelle Gitlitz, and Anna Asheroff. And we've been having so much fun. Congress has brought us in to speak multiple times. We, of course, have been working with MIT, and it's, we've spoken at the UN a few times on diversity in blockchain and really blockchain for sustainable everything, sustainable fuels, et cetera. So that's been fun. But yeah, it's, there's an organization, of course, Diversity in Blockchain. I think that we need to be very mindful not to leave those who are minorities or those who are different than us out of the mix. Because if we start to create these technologies, blockchain being one, but also especially artificial intelligence, in any sort of a vacuum, we're going to have very biased technologies that don't help the entire world. And it's not fair for us, especially with blockchain being the new financial system. We have got to be mindful to bring everyone together, super inclusive on that, make sure everyone has a voice.
Yep.
Awesome. Rosa, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, again, we met at a Women in Technology event, and so that was sort of the thing that kind of bound Shawnna and I together. Then kind of segueing into this human trafficking kind of task force that Shawnna is leading, and I think that along the way, showing women that there's a way to connect with this technology that is, and I'm going to make a broad statement about, women in tech in general, but creating these environments where it is very friendly to women, that women do not feel like they're threatened in any way by coming into this environment, which sometimes happens in tech, unfortunately. And so that has always been one of the things with BlockSpaces that we've tried to do. I'm the CEO, so whatever the environment is, I get to call it, which is great. So, we are extremely open and diverse at BlockSpaces. And, of course, we welcome women into our space in a very friendly environment. I want women to understand that this technology is about cooperation. It is solving problems that are extremely meaningful for women. It is giving women the power to have financial inclusion and in a way that they never have been able to possibly have before, especially in other countries. So there are problems that are being solved here that really resonate with women. And I just open the door and welcome, again, anyone to connect with us. Shawnna or I know would just be delighted to answer any questions like that.
Awesome.
Yeah. The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So
yeah,
I
me too.
respond to messages. Yeah. And I think I've seen that with you, Rosa. After we connected, it was like a LinkedIn, BFF going back and forth.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We actually have one question in the live chat. And it is, who is championing blockchain within organizations, business decision makers, logistics decision makers, CSOs, CIOs? Shawnna, any thoughts on that?
Yes to all the above.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. It really comes down to who is having the biggest pain point. I have done a lot of work with CSOs lately. So it's Chief Supply Chain Officer. That tends to be often a newer position from what I'm seeing in many of the corporations, especially when I was working in automotive. So yeah, the sea levels are always great, but I tell you, the ones who are having the biggest problem are the ones that are on the lines. They're in the manufacturing. I've done a lot of work, as I had mentioned, in automotive, and I love that the sea levels bring us in, but I want to talk to the people who are standing and actually doing the work, because that's where blockchain can make the biggest difference. So blockchain, along with IoT, along with RFID chips, especially for any big manufacturer, that is a dream come true.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would say, we spend a lot of time in the mid-market rather than the very large enterprises. And I would say, blockchain has always found a home and been a champion of the innovation team, right? And always a champion of the research and development team. And supply chain, even in procurement, we have champions in those areas as well. But once it gets bubbled up, to the CFO or the person that's leading the charge, there's always been this kind of question about ROI. Are blockchain projects actually someplace where I want to put my money outside of a research and development budget? And again, this is what we're seeing with COVID, is that, here is your ROI, that if you are not leading an innovation within your industry, you are opening yourself up not just to problems, but to be uncompetitive. And so this is innovation is no longer a nice to have. It's just not. And so it's a must have, and it needs to kind of firmly reside in the hands of those people that can make those decisions for companies.
Right. And there was a follow-up to that question for Shawnna. Rapid Supplier Connect clearly is a great technology to have during a crisis. What do you see as being some future implications for the technology not in a time of crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've created this specifically for COVID-19 and this crisis. It is developed off of two different products. It's Trust Your Supplier and also Sterling Supply Chain Insights. So many of our clients who use both of those products are now coming in and using this specifically for medical supplies. We only have 15 categories, well, not only, we have 15 categories on it that are the most needed medical supplies for our buyers. And, so at this point, this was specifically created for that, was specifically created to provide to the market for free as a give back from IBM. And it's one of we've had hundreds of millions of dollars that we've given back so far since this has started.
Awesome. Thank you to Sandy and Rachel for the questions. Before I wrap up the show, any other final thoughts, anything I didn't cover? If you covered everything, that's great. I just want to make sure everyone has their chance to add their little nuggets.
Oh, we could probably go on and on and on. There's so much we didn't mention, but maybe for another show. I would love to have Shawnna back.
Me too. So thank you so much for everyone in the live chat, everyone that's watching, everyone that will watch the recorded show. I want to give a special thanks to our very, very special guest, Shawnna, for providing some amazing impacts on how blockchain is going to impact the world, both now and in the future. I want to thank Rosa, Dana, and Gabe for helping set all this up. And we will see you next week. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shahan.
All right.
Thanks, Shawnna.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.